I'm
What
not going
happened
to
to this
confirm.
transparency idea? I don't get it. I'm not asking what's in the report. If an agency, if an agency wants to put their own report out, not and make it public, that's fine.
Well,
That's up to
just
them.
to be clear, the EPA didn't put their recommendations out publicly. They put out their views on the final SEIS. It's something different, but that's an important distinction.
As you rejoin us on America's Forum, we're rejoined by Miranda Kahn on the anchor desk and by Ford O'Connell at Newsmax Washington. What you just heard was AP reporter Matt Lee slamming State Department spokesman Jen Psaki for the administration's lack of transparency when it comes to the Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah, this as an EPA review of the pipeline says it could create increased development of the Canadian oil sands and cause an increase and greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, but really what's fueling environmental groups who oppose the pipeline? Our next guest says it's Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let us welcome in that guest, Dr. Richard Rahn, Senior Fellow for the CATO Institute, Chairman of the Institute for Global Economic Growth. Richard, it's great to have you here. And as I understand it, you say that Putin, Vladimir Putin, may have the deep pockets behind financing some of this opposition, correct?
Yes, we've had a number of reports going on for quite a while that Russian money was finding its way into U.S. environmental groups. And now we've got increased evidence of this. I should back up a little bit. More than a year ago, I had chaired the Bulgarian transition team 25 years ago. And Bulgarian sources told me about bribes to Bulgarian politicians from Russians to stop any oil and gas development fracking in Bulgaria. And I had written about this, again, about a year ago. And then subsequently, many other news organizations, including New York Times, did in-depth studies, stories on huge amounts of Russian money going into European politicians to stop Europe from developing their oil and gas reserves. See, Russia gets about 70% of its total foreign exchange from the sale of oil and gas, counts for about 50% of the Russian budget. So they have a huge interest in trying to keep Europe and North America from producing more oil and gas to keep their own markets. So it's a rational business decision from them. Well, one of the things that I had learned that money was going into U.S. environmental groups. And over the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of now very well documented reports of showing money from various offshore entities, which are totally black in their nature. By that I mean they don't show the sources of their income, but we know they're closely tied to Russian interest. That money goes into environmental bundlers in the U.S. and then is distributed to U.S. environmental organizations to oppose Keystone and oil and gas development in the U.S. And this, of course,
Richard, do you think the Obama administration is aware of this possibility? And if so, do you think they actually care, given their opposition, apparently, to American energy security?
I'm certain they are aware of it, and I expect they've actually encouraged it. All this kind of information, these foreign financial flows, all go into the Justice Department through into the Treasury Department, the CIA, the FBI, and so forth. They monitor all these financial flows from around the world into and out of the U.S. So with almost certainty, they are aware of it. And there have been reports I've heard that the FBI, for instance, was told to stay away from the investigation of it. I mean, this helps the president and his particular agenda by having money go in to support his allies. And this money, of course, all money going into environmental organizations is fungible, and some of it was used to probably oppose Republican candidates and during the election.
Right.
I think there's a massive scale here.
And you mentioned that it will help Russia, but it also helps Russia's allies as well, correct?
Yeah, it helps Venezuela, particularly, and of course Cuba, Iran. It's a it's a group of folks that most of us wouldn't want to have any dealings with, and are supposed to be enemies of the United States. Yet we're taking their money, or environmental organizations have been taking this money and using it for political means in the U.S.
Well, mindful of that, as you lay this out, Richard, and you have followed the money, and you've got your own suspicions on this, you were one of the first to really do this. Has it attracted much attention now? Are people starting to take a look at this? Because if so, it sounds like a major scandal for this administration.
Well, there are a number of organizations looking into this, and we've had the reports really over the last 2 weeks in the press. Again, it's tended to be more of the conservative press. The mainstream hasn't really picked it up yet. I think as increased evidence comes out and people begin to look at this, they say, hey, what is going on here? Why have Russian monetary or Russian monies, when I say Russian money, it doesn't come from the Russian treasury per se. It comes through Russian oil companies and other Russian interests. But this is all, I'm sure, directed by the Russian government. And again, going into U.S. Environmental organizations, which in turn is used to oppose oil and gas development in the U.S. In certain ways, I almost don't fault the Russians. That's rational self-interest on their part. But the fact that many of these environmental organizations hold themselves up
Richard,
as
we got
holier than
45
thou.
seconds left. Just a quick question. If the Republicans in Congress were to launch an investigation on this, because they've shown themselves to be very bad at that, where would they start and how would they frame this to bring this to the attention of the American people? Because this is something that's really upsetting based on what you've just told us.
Well, what they need to do is have subpoena the environmental organizations' records of where they get their money from and where those who are the feeders, what we call the bundlers, get their money from. And it's just following the money back to the original sources and making sure that all this is legitimate. Of course, any individual American has a total right to give to these organizations, but this is all supposed to be transparent, particularly under the new factor regulations and other regulations.
As you mentioned this, Richard Rahn, it brings a new double entendre to the notion of those groups advocating green policies. Green as in money. We got to follow that money. Richard Rahn, thanks. We're coming back with more following this Newsmax Now update.